Dr. Rick Van Acker, once again from University of Illinois at Chicago, who will be speaking with us about the skilled helper, a model to help address the resistive teacher. None of us have those, right? All right. Thanks, Rick.
All right. Good morning. This is, I don't know what, my fourth, fifth, I don't know what number of presentations that we've done here every year. Last couple times we've talked, as we've gone through, people say, yeah, but I've got this teacher. How are we going to deal with this teacher who doesn't want to change or doesn't want to do something? So I thought that today we would actually start working with looking at some ways that we can begin to work with teachers. Now, to a certain extent, this information will double dip. The skills that you're going to use in working with a resistive teacher, guess what? Are the exact same skills you're going to use when working with a resistive student. Okay? There is absolutely no difference by virtue of age. It's just simply a matter of the wording that you choose in terms of making sure that the person understands what you're talking about. But it's the same skills. I want to walk you through the handouts and then we'll just open up for some questions. You've got the PowerPoint presentation, and that's been 3-hole punched. That's making it very easy for you. The two that I brought are not quite so easy. You have another packet. This is actually written in terms of the skills as though you're working with a child. So you'll see in there talking to the child, talking to the child. We're going to talk about talking to the teacher today. Just change the word child to teacher and it's the same information. And then you've got some data. This afternoon we're going to actually look at 2 videos today. One you've seen before with a kindergarten student that's having some problems. Mac, I don't know if people remember the Mac tape. We're going to see that again and let you actually talk to that teacher. One of you is going to play the role of the teacher. One of you is going to be the helper. One's going to observe, and we're going to watch and see how that process goes as you try to give feedback to that teacher about that interaction. This afternoon we're going to work on a young man named Tori. He's a student with hearing impairments. He also has cognitive impairments and has a lot of non-compliance issues. And we're going to see a little video of that young man as well as some data that has been fabricated for him that we'll work with that this afternoon. Before we get started on this, you guys have been doing behavior now for quite some time. You've been doing FBAs, BIPs. I was actually in a school not too long ago up in Wisconsin, and one of the social workers, we were talking about behavior interventions and the requirement for a behavior intervention plan for students with disabilities. And she said, how long has this been required? I said, just a little over a decade. Okay, so this is, wow, why? This has been in play for some time. There are still people who go, what? We've got to do what? So let me start by just asking what questions or concerns. Obviously, again, you're giving up a day. You're coming in here. You're hoping you're going to get some answers. What are some issues that maybe have come up in this past year that you know, even if it doesn't have to do with the resistive teacher, that we can start off with in terms of just answering some questions or some concerns? Anything pressing? Yeah.
I was just wondering, when you are requested to go in and observe a student, do you generally know what behavior you're looking at ahead of time, or you just kind of go in there and kind of see the lay of the land to start with?
I usually get some information about this is what the student's problem is. I oftentimes find that is not the key problem. Okay? As I go in and look at what's happening, in fact, with Tori, we're talking about non-compliance. Oftentimes, I'll go into a room and they'll say this student is disruptive or this student is defiant. And when I first go in, the first thing I find out is that they're only complying about 20% of the time. So one of the pre-issues is that this kid's not complying enough, and then when all of a sudden the teacher starts pushing the kid, they become defiant or disruptive. But the real issue is compliance. And then you have to start looking at why is the child not complying. And in many cases it's because they don't understand what's being asked of them in the first place. And so it's really not necessarily even the biggest change is not the child behavior, it's the adult behavior. And you know, as we've talked before, almost always, if you are going to change a kid's behavior, you're going to have to change the adult's behavior first. Because as long as that behavior for the kid works, there is no reason in the world they're going to change it. Now that does not mean the teacher's doing something bad or even wrong or anything like that. It's just that the current way the teacher responds supports the student's behavior. That's why they keep doing it. And there's no reason this kid's going to change just because, boy, wouldn't it be nice if he did? There's going to have to be some change in the context to support these changes. So it oftentimes shifts. And again, oftentimes it's not just one behavior, and you're going to have to decide, of these 5 behaviors that challenge this child, what 1 or 2 am I going to focus on? Because if you try to change all 5, you'll be so splintered you'll get nothing done. Okay? Other questions or a follow-up question? Or
Well, yeah. So when you go in there and you're going to take Dad on, let's say, disruptive, do you start taking Dad on disruption, or do you just start taking Dad on some new behavior, or do you just...
I'll usually do both, and oftentimes, again, especially if it's a situation where I see it's a chain, I'll try to take data that will allow me to show that, to actually demonstrate that. So again, I oftentimes, and you'll see by some of the data that I do, I oftentimes walk into a classroom with nothing more than a pad of graph paper. And I can start doing all kinds of boxes. So let's say I'm looking at compliance. So I may have, the teacher gives a request in one line. The next line is the child complies. Next line is the child ignores. Next is the child resists. Then I might have consequence. Then I might have a line for what's the next child behavior. So if I see the child gets a request, he ignores, the teacher gets on the student in terms of some kind of verbal reprimand, now the child talks back, and can I then begin to sit down with the teacher and just point out, look down this column and you can see the chain of events that occur with this child each time. So given this response by you, 70% of the time the kid is going to come back with this response. What do you think we should change first? And again, one of the things that I oftentimes talk with teachers about is that, and we've mentioned this before, is the fact that we don't invite children to come to school. We compel them to come to school. So if I'm the kid, I didn't choose to be in this seat. You're making me be in this seat. The teachers chose to be teachers. Now, that doesn't mean that their job is easy, because it's the toughest job I can think of. But you chose to be here. They're compelled by law. Somebody has to blink first here. Who do you think ought to blink first? The person we're paying to be here, or the person we're compelling to be here? And sometimes you have to be very frank and confrontive, and we'll talk about that as actually a level 2 skill, as a mild confrontation, is to help people realize, oh, shit, yeah, that's right, I guess maybe I should do this. Because it's very easy to become, just bombarded with stuff, and all of a sudden you feel like this kid is just making my Thursdays difficult, and how am I going to make some changes here? Other questions or things that you're seeing in the field, or issues that are coming up as you're doing this? Yes.
We're kind of dealing with a teacher where no solution is going to work. Everything we offer and we have offered, but there's well, it's not going to work because of this, it's not going to work because of that. Well, I just don't think so. We've tried that before. So we have that, but then the other piece of that is we have sabotaging of data because none of our solutions are going to work. So she's proving that it's just not going to happen.
Right, and the comment is that she has a teacher who's, no matter what you come up with, is like, well, that's not going to work, or probably I've tried that and it didn't work, or whatever. And then even if she puts something in place, there might be some sabotage, either of the intervention or of the data that's collected. That is not all that unusual. I'd love to say that's a really, really rare situation. But you've got to think about it. To a certain extent, we expect teachers to have all the knowledge to change all kids' behaviors, to teach every academic, and they're supposed to know that when they step into that room. I mean, there's this kind of this unspoken expectation that you know it all. And not many administrators go in and say, look, you're going to step in front of 25 kids if it's an elementary teacher, for the most part. You're going to step in front of 170-some kids if you're a middle school or high school teacher. You probably do not have all the skills necessary to meet the needs of each and every one of these children, and you're going to have to ask for help. So when I ask for help, I'm already kind of admitting I'm not cut out to do the job you gave me. This is already an admission of somehow I've failed. The other thing is that, quite frankly, most teachers do try everything they know before they ever ask for help. So I've tried a bunch of stuff, and I might trust you, and I'll go talk to you and go, what am I going to do with this kid? I'm going to rip my hair out, or I'm going to rip his hair out. But by God, somebody's going to have some hair missing. And so I've got some trusted colleagues. I get their input. That hasn't worked. Now I've got to go to some system and ask for support. If all of a sudden I ask Carrie here to give me some ideas, and she gives me one, I go back and I try it, and works just like that. Damn. Okay? And what does that say about me? So there is a certain level of self-interest that maybe things don't work quite so well. In some cases, you have to just talk about that. Talk about that elephant in the room. And say that one of the big issues is, and I oftentimes start with that there really is no reason you should have all the knowledge to deal with this. Most of our general education teachers have no behavior management class at all. None. Okay? Special education teachers now, because we do the learning behavior specialist, get a very, very thin veneer of knowledge on a whole bunch of stuff and no depth on anything. So we are putting a whole bunch of people in classrooms that really don't have good information about how to deal with behavior. So being able to just kind of give permission that you don't necessarily have to know all this. Plus, if you're now throw on top of that that you've got a child who's deaf or has got a hearing impairment, and that throws a whole nother piece in the puzzle. And in most cases, most teachers have had 1 day on hearing impairment and deafness, and that was in their survey of special education class, in which we draw out, the disability of the day, right? And we throw it out there. So the fact that they even remember anything about that and have the understanding of some of the nuances that you had that goes into working with a child who's got a hearing problem. So you've got lots of ways to give teachers kind of permission to not know. Now, the other side of it is that there are certain teachers, and we'll talk about as we get into the skills. I did family therapy for a while, and oftentimes you'll get families who, nothing's going to work or that's not going to happen, and sometimes you just have to say, well then, good luck. Call me when you've got it. Call me when you've got a problem, because it doesn't sound like you have a problem right now. You're not sick enough. Call me when you're sicker. And so, but we'll look at some confrontation strategies. We'll look at some issues. The other thing is that it sounds like you're maybe not giving the teacher enough play in the activity. So, is she or he part of the coming up with a plan? As opposed to let me play shell answer man and give you the answer. Because if you come in and play shell answer man, oftentimes they're going to do that because again they don't want you to be successful. They want, everybody's going to fail. This kid's, you don't understand how sick this kid is, right? So as we go through things, talk about it. You're going to have a chance we're going to do a lot of role play today. Now one thing I will ask you to do in the role play is be real. Don't decide that by God I'm going to dig my heels and I don't care if this person starts spitting gold coins. I'm not accepting anything. Think about, would you respond favorably if a person came at you in that approach? If they talk to you about this, would you probably respond? I want you to be as real as you can be. But I also want you to be as real as you can be in terms of what are some of the problems you might have so that the person who you're working with actually has to dig a little bit deeper in terms of using some of the skills we're going to talk about. Other questions or comments that come up? Am I going way too fast? Am I talking way too fast? Yes, okay. You guys out there keep going, because I tend to do that anyhow. Yes?
What happens if you have a teacher who is willing to try something that has been part of the planning process, but then has a student that is not always there? And so whenever that student comes back, it's starting the whole process over again, teaching them the technique and practicing it with them, and teachers only have so much time in a day. So how do you keep them motivated then to keep trying?
Okay. That's one of those cases where the initial problem may not be the only problem. So if I go in there and attendance is a huge problem, now that becomes a problem in and of itself. So I may have to sit down and go, what is this attendance issue? Why is this student not here? Is it health and there's not a lot of control over it? Is it because there's a lot of family issues going on and he just, they just don't manage to get him there, or he doesn't manage to get there? Or we'll get a lot of kids who are, if a family's in a lot of turmoil, will engage in school phobia. It's not anything to do with the school. It's because if I leave home, this home structure is going to change and it may disappear, but if I stay, I can control it. And so it's not out of fear of what goes on at school, it's fear of what's going to happen in the family if I'm not there to protect it. So that may become a whole other issue. We may have to talk about, why is Billy not coming? Those things also enter in sometimes even into placement questions. And I know that we get into all kinds of issues, but if I've got a kid who's missing lots of school and in a regular classroom the momentum keeps going, I add one more straw to the back of that camel. That this kid keeps coming in, and not only is there not a continuity in the behavior program, I can't compete academically because now you're talking about something I have no clue where the hell you're at. And again, I would rather look bad than stupid. So oftentimes kids will then start engaging in more behavior problems to mask academic problems. And so that would be another piece I would want to look at in a case like that in terms of what's the cost of being out that much to this student's ability to keep up. Okay. Other issues, questions? All right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started then. What time is lunch? I keep forgetting it.
Lunch is 12:15. We usually break maybe 10:45.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to kind of gauge in terms of I don't want to start the video and all of a sudden it's lunchtime. Okay. All right. Basically, this material that we're pulling from is from a book by Gerard Egan called The Skilled Helper. I think it's in something like its 11th edition. It is a very, very common book to be utilized almost in any program for social workers that are going to train social workers. It's been used in suicide prevention. A lot of programs that work with students with emotional and behavioral disorders will use The Skilled Helper because what Egan has done is there was a man a number of years ago named Kharkov. And Kharkov looked at therapists. And what he found was that good therapists resembled one another irregardless of what their training background was. So I could get somebody who was a Rogerian therapist who's kind of like, well, how do you feel about that? And is very supportive and caring and concerned. Or I could get a Gestalt therapist who puts the person in the hot seat and really challenges them. Even though very different theoretical orientations, therapists that helped their clients looked more alike than they looked different. And so what Kharkov wanted to do was, can I begin to identify what these therapists that actually help share in common? And what he came across was there's a number of skills. And that a good therapist or a good person who's going to help someone change is very, very competent at shifting between these various skills. And empathy, respect, respect for the client, being concrete, helping you deal with things right in the here and now, and we're not going to be vague about stuff. We're going to talk very clearly, as objectively as I can about what I'm seeing happen. So, in a situation where, one of the things that just seems a challenge for me as we're sitting here is that every time we begin to look at a solution, you've got 4 reasons that it's not going to work. I find that to be a huge challenge. I guess I'm wondering what's your suggestion in terms of how to get past this? And it's kind of like I'm not going to. Sometimes as helpers, we feel like, well, I understand this, but I couldn't possibly say something like this to the person because that would devastate them. And part of being respectful is I've got to say it in a way you can hear it, but I've got to trust that Carrie is perfectly capable of handling the truth. I've just got to say it in a way she can hear. Okay? She's not going to fall apart. She's not going to go out and quit teaching, unless maybe that's the right answer. And I had a couple of cases where it's been, okay, that's great. I had one teacher where it was a student who had lots of medical issues, and there were toileting issues, all kinds of things. And basically it was, I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to do that. And it was kind of like, well, it's good to know that. Unfortunately, that's the job. So I guess the question is, what are you going to do next year? Because that's the job. I mean, in fact, I'm leaving for Neenah, Wisconsin when I get done here, and I've got a similar situation that the teacher and the principal of the school this child's going to have already said, we aren't going to do that. Right? And it's an effective behavior intervention plan that's been showing lots of success. It's like, oh, yeah, you are. Guess what? If somebody's not going to do it, it's not going to be, if something's going to change, it's not going to be the plan. It's going to be you. And one of the things as an outside consultant, I can come in and break those family rules and say that kind of stuff, right? Because I don't have to live with these people. So I can go in and say, yeah, you are. Okay. Additive empathy. That's kind of like, I hear what you're saying. I can put myself in your shoes. But it also seems like you're saying this, and I take it down one more level. And I actually begin to help the person explore something that, oftentimes you'll get a teacher who, maybe the yes, but, kind of a thing. And it's like, I hear that you're here, you want to be you want to be involved, you want to assist, but at the same time, I sense a real deep level of resistance. Okay? And so you kind of go down one more level. Congruence in terms of what they're saying and doing fitting together. Again, I like to use the example of a young man I worked with in a residential treatment center, and I was the director of the children's home at the time, and I tended to be a hard person to find. I tended to be in the units and walking around and doing stuff. I wasn't in my office. And this young man, who actually now does all my computer work, and we're still very good friends, he came up to me and he said, "I hate this place. I'm running away." And I go, "John, how long have you been looking for me?" "About 25 minutes. He said, "This is really a pain." I said, "You know, there's not a locked door anywhere in this building. Do you know how far away you could have been in 25 minutes? I'm having a hard time thinking you want to run away when you spent 25 minutes looking for me to tell me you want to run away." All right, so what you're saying and what you're doing don't fit. All right? Self-disclosure. Being able to talk about something that in your life. Now, you got to be careful about that, but being able to share some kind of a similar situation that might give some insight. Confrontation. That's the one most of us don't like. Most of us don't like confrontation. It is an incredibly important skill. And we're talking very mild forms of confrontation, and we'll look at this as we go through. But again, nobody likes change but a wet baby, right? And when we're asking teachers to change, they're probably not going to say, "Oh, geez, thank you," right? This is going to be a problem. This is going to be a challenge, right? And then immediacy, talking about things right now, not 10 years down the line or in the past, those kinds of things. All right, you're going to be serving as a collaborator or a consultant. The less skill the teacher has, the more you become the consultant. The greater the skills the teacher has, the more you collaborate. And don't be afraid. I know we're very much into this, I want them to be part of it. You're going to run across some teachers who simply have almost like a blank slate when it comes to behavior, or a blank slate when it comes to dealing with kids with hearing and impairments. And you're going to have to play the lion's share of giving them tools to work with. Now, the problem becomes when you get a resistive teacher who's also an unskilled teacher. That can be a bit of a challenge. We want the teacher to talk. One of the biggest tools in your toolbox is actually going to be silence. That too is hard for us. We like to fill every vacant minute. So if all of a sudden I say something and it's just quiet, and Tracy here is kind of not liking maybe where things are going or what we're talking about, or if you look at the data that we've talked about over the years, oftentimes you put this down in front of the teacher. It does not take a rocket scientist to look at this and go, "Wow, I praised this kid 4 times, reprimanded him 27. This is probably not going to be information I want to hear." Right? Doesn't take a rocket scientist sometimes to realize that we are our own worst enemy. As I sit this down and talk to Tracy and talk, well, let's look at the ratio of praise to reprimand. She's probably going to be quiet. If I stay quiet, it's uncomfortable for me, but guess what's even more uncomfortable for? Tracy. Wait them out. All right? Let them talk. We really want more information from them, not more information from you. In this kind of process, they should be doing the bulk of the talking. All right? We want to have the better awareness of themselves and their situation. In these, we're building a plan. In most cases, these plans have to change that social context. So we're going to have to be aware of that context. We have to be aware of my role as the teacher, the peers, maybe the administration and the school policies in whole. All of those things may be part of the context that may have to be changed. Okay. And then we're going to focus on ways to help them manage their problems and to develop opportunities. In this model, basically Egan has taken Kharkov's work and he's broken it down into 3 phases, or 3 stages, and a pre-helping stage. Okay? And we're going to talk through each one of those. We're going to look at an example, and then we're going to do some role-playing and play with some of this kind of stuff. In that pre-helping phase, there are basically 2 things you're worried about. Am I aware of the person I'm working with, and am I attending well to them? Okay, am I attending to their behavior, to their situation, so that they feel comfortable in sharing with me? Now, the first part, in terms of being aware kind of a situation, there's this acronym called SOLAR, okay? In most cases, I want to face the person squarely. All right, now, you've always got to be careful because there are cultural overtones to some of this stuff. So depending upon what culture you're working with, you've got to be culturally sensitive. Okay? So I want to face the person squarely. I want to maintain an open posture. I don't want to have my arms crossed and be all locked up and all this kind of stuff. All right? I want to lean a little bit towards the person. If I'm kind of leaning towards you, I'm kind of indicating that I'm with you. If I'm sitting back like I'm in a lounge chair, and kind of like if I doze off, just kick me, right? Probably not all that convinced that I'm really interested in what you have to say, all right? Eye contact, and this is what's got to be culturally sensitive, all right? As white middle-class individuals, what are we supposed to do with our eyes when we are talking? Okay? Do we look at them straight in the eye the entire time that I talk, just like this, the entire...
No, but there has to be a certain...
I look and break, okay? So I make sure that, I don't want to stare this person down. As a listener, I'm looking for, so when I'm showing them that I'm listening, I should be maintaining eye contact. Now remember, that's not true for all cultures. We even talked about, I think last couple of times, we talked about, there's the book by, having a blank here, it's a little senior moment here. Black and White Styles of Conflict. That's, the name of the guy will come to me in a minute. But basically, it was research done in the 90s in Chicago. But one of the things they talk about there is the fact that as African Americans, I do not have to have eye contact to be listening. So I may be looking down, and as a white middle-class person, I'm assuming this person isn't listening to me. That may not be true at all. Okay? On the other hand, they're more likely to maintain eye contact when they're talking with you and to be more animated because they want to show you that they mean what they're talking about. So they're going to violate a little bit of what our white middle-class values are, and there's a lot of people who suggest that that may be one of the reasons that we tend to punish them more severely. And if you look at the reason that we're doing these BIPs and FBAs is because we were suspending and expelling too many kids with disabilities, far greater than the number one would anticipate. We are still doing this with African Americans, especially African American males, and Native Americans. All right? Two groups that tend to not play the same way we do in terms of listening and speaking. And I mentioned before that the Office of Civil Rights is working very hard to make this FBA BIP thing a school-wide across all children, not just kids with disabilities, which will be a nightmare if that ever happens. But they are working very hard, and probably for good reason, because we do not police ourselves well. We wait for legislators to come by and put a law into place. So maybe we should be a little better at this. All right. I want to be relaxed. All right. When I am listening to that person, I want to watch what they're doing. I want to watch their eye contact. I want to look at their body posture. I want to look at the urgency in their voice. I want to listen to the words they're using. I want to see how they're laying this problem out. Okay? Do they recognize they have a role? Is it all the kid? Is it all the parents? Sometimes we even give the kid a pass, right? We put it all on the parents. Where do they see the problem at? Because I've got to kind of work out of their head. So I've got to have a sense of what they're doing. I want to do a lot of active listening. I kind of want to modulate. If all of a sudden I'm talking to Regina here and she's just really way up here, all loaded, I want to actively, by using myself, calm her down. So I'm probably going to talk slower. I'm going to bring my voice down, hopefully allowing her to modulate down so that we can begin to work. Am I aware of this? The other thing that's important is that most of us, it's estimated that 70% of what we say non-verbally. Okay? Are you aware of what your body's doing? Now, for many of you who are going to be using sign, your hands are going to be taken care of, right? They're going to be busy doing the sign. If you're working with someone who you don't have to have sign with, what are your hands doing? Okay? What's the rest of your body doing? What messages are you giving? So part of that, the pre-phase is just being aware of the person, being aware of yourselves, and you want to use yourself very strategically. You're the best tool you have. Okay? So be aware of yourself. All right, it then goes through these 3 stages. And as you see, there's arrows going back and forth. This is not a lockstep process. You don't stay in phase 1. Okay, good, phase 1 is done. Now I can move to phase 2. You will find yourself moving back and forth between the skills as you're doing the process. You may have to very early on do some mild confrontation just to get things in place. So you may step to a skill 2, a stage 2 skill, back to stage 1 to help the person express the problem. Okay, as you're going through the problem solving, you may get people who are scared. You're going to have to go back to phase 1 skills in terms of being able to help them become clear about what's going on. So you'll see that these things bounce back and forth. Okay, we're going to talk about phase 1 or stage 1. What I want to do is get the person to tell me what's going on. So if we're talking about a kid, what's happening with this kid? What's the scenario? I need the story. And I want as full a story as I possibly can get in the time that I have to do this. This does not have to take hours and months and everything else. This can happen very, very quickly. I want to identify blind spots the teacher may have. And how many of you, when you've gone and taken data, and you sit down and you talk with a teacher, there's tons of blind spots. The teacher's not the least bit aware of his or her role in what's going on. All right? Again, not unusual at all. To me, one of the beauties of the FBA and the BIP is that for the very first time, teacher behavior not only can be talked about, frankly, it has to be talked about. There is no way you're going to alter the context and help most of your kids be successful if you can't overtly talk about teacher behavior, which means you're going to collect data on teacher behavior. And you're going to share this data with the teacher. Now, one of the things that I try to be very careful of is that when I go, because the FBA and the BIP, who's responsible for doing this? The team. This is not a one-man show, although in most cases it's a one-man show in most schools, all right? But it is a team responsibility. Ultimately, I'm going to have to share the information with the team, all right? So what I don't want to go in and say in the team, well, one of the things we noticed was that Tracy reprimands about 18 times more frequently than she praises, okay? And that's a real problem for Randy, all right? And so when she starts becoming very negative, Randy acts out, all right? How's Tracy going to feel about this team meeting? All right? Yeah, I'm going to lose Tracy right off the bat. And if I'm going to have somebody sabotage the program, Tracy's going to go for it with both feet, right? At the same time, I might talk, it's going to be important for me to say, Randy has a real problem with accepting criticism. He is very susceptible to messages of failure. We're going to have to be very attentive to the ratio of praise to reprimand, and we're going to have to make sure that he gets far more messages of success than he does failure. Now, that's what's important for building the plan. Not laying out that Tracy wasn't doing that in the past. It's facilitating the process in the future. Okay? So that becomes, now, when I meet with Tracy, if I'm sitting down, if I'm the one, we're going to be very open about it. But when we go to the team and talk about what's going on, it becomes a much more process of building a plan, not reporting what we found. Does that make sense? Okay. Want to focus on strengths rather than weaknesses. In any situation you walk into, you better be able to identify 2 or 3 things the teacher is doing well. You always want to lead with those things. All right? Now, sometimes you have to look hard, okay? Especially if you get a teacher who's very fed up with a child or is very unskilled, you may have to look pretty hard. But you're going to be able to find some things the teacher's doing well. All right. The goal in terms of telling that story is to be specific about their experience and actions and to understand their story more fully. So you're going to use empathy. Now, empathy, again, is being able to place yourself in their shoes. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily agree with what they're doing, but can you see that given the situation, I can see where you're at. I kind of understand where you're at. All right? Not sympathy. Sympathy kind of looks down on. Empathy is just putting yourself in that place so that I can kind of see what's happening. I'm going to ask questions. And I want those questions to be able to allow the teacher to dig a little bit deeper into the nature of the story. So I'm going to use probes, all right? And I'm going to use summaries. Why would I want to summarize as we're going through things?
You want them to hear what they've been saying. You want to repeat it back to them so they know that you were listening.
Okay, absolutely. I want, first of all, my summary can sometimes put together 2 or 3 things that they may not be putting together. So as I summarize it, I can say, and it seems like this is what's going on. I always do that as a question. So they can go, oh, no, 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 that's not at all what's happening. All right? Again, giving me more information. You know, maybe there's this person's very blind to what's going on, or I realize there's going to be some deeper resistance. But I do summary so that they know I'm with them, that I'm hearing things accurately, and again, it allows me to link things together in ways that help move the process along. Okay. I want to identify those blind spots. All right? So my empathy and my summaries, I can reflect with the teacher kind of what you heard the teacher and consider the situation from a different perspective. So in that summary, I might switch perspectives a little bit and go from the child's perspective. I'm hearing this. I'm wondering, all right, in the probe situation, what do you think Billy's feeling when this happens, this happens, this happens? All right, so I'm just trying to get a sense of what's happening. I may start to challenge a little bit, again, very mildly, for the things that don't necessarily fit together well. If I start hearing those inconsistencies, I might want to start mildly challenging. I'm a little bit confused. I heard you saying over here that you wanted to do X, Y, and Z. And then I saw here that you said something that was just the opposite. Or I hear that you really want Johnny to be successful. But as we look at the data, you never called on him. So I'm having a hard time. How do you communicate that desire for him to be successful? Because I'm just not seeing this here. And I trust that you believe, that that's what you want. How does that become real? It's very common if you get students, for example, I work with a lot of, talking out is a big issue for most kids in most general education classrooms. If Mary Beth back here, every time I ask a question, hollers out the answer. Most teachers begin not calling on the Mary Beths because they're already answering 30% of the questions that get asked, so I'll be damned if I'm going to give her an opportunity to respond. Now I want Mary Beth to stop talking out, but every time she raises her hand, what do I do as the teacher? I ignore it. So if I look at the data, I'm hearing you want her to raise her hand and be like the rest of the students. The problem I have is when we look at the data and she's raising her hand, it doesn't work. So if she wants a place in the sun, what does she have to do? She has to call out. So I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't fit what you're doing. All right? And I understand why you're doing it. It makes perfect sense. It's just this is not going to work. All right? Questions? Yes?
I think one way to deal with the inconsistency and try to avoid a challenging position, particularly if you sense the other person is defensive already, or not open to what you're going to point out, but you clearly see the inconsistency, is to take a position of confusion. Gee, I see this going on over here, and I also see it going on over here, and I'm left feeling confused. I don't know what's going on.
Absolutely.
It reduces defensiveness in the other person, but they're also then being challenged on some level to try to explain what's going on.
Absolutely. That's kind of thing. I'm just a little confused here. This is going on and this is going on. And can you make sense out of that? How do you see that? What helps you explain that? The other thing is that we've done this in the past, but I do collect data, and I just boom, and I try to make it as visual as I can in terms of the X's and what's going on. I explain what I did, and they can look at their data. Now, one of the things is, again, it doesn't usually take a rocket scientist for them to look and start seeing the things in their own data that are probably going to be problematic. Now, one of the things that it allows me to do in many cases is that I don't have to have them be defensive. I can be kind of upfront with things. So for example, if you go into most classrooms, you're going to find that the ratio of praise to reprimand tends to go towards reprimand. All right? The typical teacher reprimands 6 to 10 times more frequently than they praise. Almost no teacher believes that. Almost every teacher you ask, do you praise more than you reprimand? Absolutely. Okay? Go in and collect data, and it isn't even close. All right? But that's news to them. All right? So when you sit down, so the first thing they look at that and they go, shit, this is not going to be good. All right? You can say, you know, one of the things is, you know, most teachers reprimand 6 to 10 times more often than they praise. All right? You're only reprimanding 4 times more frequently. You're actually better than the typical teacher. All right? So to a certain extent, you can kind of go, this is not good, but it's not as bad as most people have to face. But you know what? You're right. For Randy, this is probably not going to work. All right?